Good morning. How are you today? This is Miss Razan. Today we are going to talk about food and ideal diet. So please open your book, page 52. As you know, that we have main six food groups, which are carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins, minerals, and fiber. In this lesson, we are going to focus on three groups, and we are going to know the functions of each component. But before, we are going to understand why organisms require food. As you know that all living organisms are made up of molecules. Those molecules are organized so that they can carry out the characteristics of life, which are reproduction, movement, nutrition, respiration, and whatever. So, living organisms need food because it supplies them with many things. The first one, as we said, that food supplies molecules that are the raw materials for repair, growth, and development of the body tissues. So, food groups supplies molecules that are the raw materials for repair, growth, and development of the body tissue. And also, it supplies molecules that can be oxidized. It oxidized in respiration process. And as you know, in respiration, that will produce energy. And the last thing, it supplies elements and compounds that enable the raw materials and energy to be used. That means without those elements and compounds, we cannot use the energy in our body. Okay, but the question now, or the questions now, how do living organisms take in the food? And do all of them take the food in the same way? What do you think? How do living organisms take in the food, and do all of them take the food in the same way? Okay, to answer these questions, look at this chart. If you remember, we divided the living organisms into two types. The first type is autotrophic, and the second type is heterotrophic. Autotrophic means self-feeding. For example, green plants can make their own organic molecules by photosynthesis. So plants photosynthesize to make their own organic molecules. So again, autotrophic means self-feeding, such as green plants. So plants photosynthesize to make their own organic molecules, so they are autotrophic. Okay, now what about heterotrophic, which means other feeding? As you know, other organisms such as humans and animals cannot make their own food, and they have to take in food molecules from their surroundings. So this way is called heterotrophic. So autotrophic and heterotrophic, we have to define all of them. The first one, autotrophic, is capable of making its own food supply using inorganic molecules and photosynthesis. And heterotrophic is an organism that cannot produce its own food, instead taking nutrition from plants and animals. So here, other feeding, we take in food from plants and animals. But plants, by photosynthesis, they make their own food. Okay, now we are going to focus on the food that humans take to stay alive. So the first thing you have to know that the total of the molecules of a nutrient that we need is called the diet. So the total of the molecules, all the nutrients that we need, is called the diet. So we have to take a balanced diet which provides all the nutrients in the correct amounts. So again, the total of the molecules or nutrients that we need is called the diet, and we have to take a balanced diet which provides all the nutrients in the correct amounts. So if the person does not take all the nutrients in the correct proportions, he may suffer from malnutrition. So if the person does not take all the nutrients in the correct proportions, he may suffer from malnutrition. Malnutrition means bad feeding. It could be eating too much of all food or having too little food. So malnutrition means bad feeding. This bad feeding could be eating too much or too little amount. And as we said before, or as we studied before, we said that we can analyze the food to find out what chemicals it contains by making many tests such as purity test, iodine test, and DCPIP test, if you remember. So here in this lesson, we have to know the types of the food that we eat. So the balanced diet should contain the correct proportions of carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, vitamins, water, and fiber. Okay, so the balanced food should contain carbohydrate, protein, fat, vitamins, minerals, fiber as food groups, and also it should contains water. Okay, now focus on this pie chart which shows balance and adequate diet, and adequate here means enough amount of food. So this diet provides enough energy for metabolic work such as respiration, thinking, digesting, and whatever. And the amount of food or the correct proportions of the main three food groups, fat, proteins, and carbohydrates, 1/7 for fat, 1/7 for protein, and 5/7 for carbohydrate. Again, the correct proportions of the main three food groups, fat, proteins, and carbohydrates, 1/7 for fat, 1/7 for protein, and 5/7 for carbohydrate. Now let's study the details about the main three groups, which are carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. So the first food group is carbohydrates. Actually, the good food source or the good source of carbohydrates are rice, potatoes, and cereals, and we have different foods, bread also, and all cereals, they are a good source of carbohydrates. Okay, what is the function or what are the functions of carbohydrates in humans? Actually, you have to know that carbohydrates is a source of energy. So, glucose in our body is oxidized in respiration, and that will release energy for active transport, cell division, and many activities inside our body. And some of carbohydrates or the excess carbohydrates can be stored as glycogen and also as fat. So the main function of protein for carbohydrates, that carbohydrates are a source of energy. Okay? Now here we have a question. Where do carbohydrates digest? The question now is, where do carbohydrates digest? You have to know that they are digested in the mouth and small intestine and absorbed as glucose. So again, carbohydrates are digested in mouth and in small intestine, and actually it absorbed as glucose. Okay? And also, as you know, that we have two types of carbohydrates, which are sugar and starch. So actually, refined sugars are absorbed very rapidly. So sugar gives a sudden boost or uplift of energy source. But starch is digested and absorbed more slowly. So starch is called slow release carbohydrates. Again, sugar, actually refined sugar are absorbed very rapidly. So sugar gives a sudden uplift of energy source. But starch is digested and absorbed more slowly. So we called it slow release carbohydrates. Okay, now what about the second food group, which is lipids? You have to know that fats divided, before everything, you have to know that fats divided into two types, which are saturated fats and unsaturated fats. So saturated fats such as meat, milk, egg, and whatever, and unsaturated fat such as sunflower seeds and peanuts, and we have many oils. Okay, now here we have the difference in saturated and unsaturated fats. Those are the food in saturated fats, and those are the food in unsaturated fats. Okay. Now, the functions of lipids. Actually, we have many functions for lipids. The first one, lipids are energy store. You have to know that lipids are energy store because they are insoluble in water. So why do lipids store energy? Because they are insoluble in water. And also because they are insoluble in water, we call them insulations. So lipids provide insulations for the body. Okay? Not only heat insulation, actually electrical insulation and thermal insulation. Okay. And the third function of lipids form part of cell membrane. So you know that cell membrane contains what? Lipids. So cell membrane contains lipids, so the lipids are very important. And the last thing, lipids, steroid hormones, including sex hormones. So steroid hormones such as sex hormones. Okay, so those are the main four functions for lipids: energy store, insulations, and form or part of cell membranes, and also steroid hormones. Okay, so fats and oils are digested in the small intestine. So where do fats and oils digest? They are digested in the small intestine, and as you know, fats or oils digest to give fatty acids and the glycerol. So fats, when they digest, so that they will produce fatty acids and the glycerol. So as we say, we have two types of lipids: saturated fatty acids and other contains unsaturated fatty acids. So saturated fats, they contain saturated fatty acids, and unsaturated fats, they contain unsaturated fatty acids. So you have to know that also eating too much amount of saturated fats and unsaturated fats, that will make problems, because the body can store unlimited amount of fat, contributing to obesity and also cause disease of the circulation such as atheroma. So if you remember, in 8th grade we studied atheroma, and we said if the fats deposit at the wall of the arteries, that will make atheroma, so the blood cells cannot pass. So eating too much fat, that will be very dangerous, and that will make very big problems. Okay, the last group in this lesson is proteins. So as you know, we find protein in meat, and we find it in egg and peas and beans, and also we can find it in some plants. Now, what are the functions of proteins? So here, where do we find the proteins? Okay. So what are the functions of protein? As we said before, proteins used as catalysts to speed up the reactions inside the body. We said before, and there was a long lesson about catalysts. So proteins used as catalysts to speed up the reactions inside our bodies. And also proteins transport molecules such as hemoglobin. So also proteins transport molecules, and they work as structural materials in muscles. You know that all muscles contain proteins. And some proteins are hormones such as insulin. You know that we have hormones, they are made of protein. And the last function of protein, that proteins can defend against diseases like antibodies. So also proteins can defend against diseases. So we have an example like antibodies. So we will study the details of the last function during next lessons. Now, proteins actually digested in the stomach. Here you have to know that proteins digested in the stomach and small intestine and absorbed as amino acids. It's important to know that proteins digested in stomach and in small intestine. If you remember, we said before that the amino acids that supplied in the diet, as the body cannot make them, are called the essential amino acids. We said before that all amino acids that supplied in the diet and our body cannot make them, we call them essential amino acids. So essential amino acids, we take them from the food because our body cannot make them. And also you have to know that we have 20 different amino acids. Look at this picture. We have 20 different amino acids to make all the different proteins. So we have many proteins, but the number of amino acids only 20 amino acids. Okay, animal proteins usually contain all 20 amino acids, but plant proteins often lack one or two of the essential amino acids. So when we eat animal proteins, we know that we take in 20 different types of amino acids. But when we take plants or when we eat plants, we know that there are two proteins are lacking in this essential amino acids. So now the deficiency of protein causes poor growth, but in extreme cases may cause very big problems like marasmus or kwashiorkor. So here we have marasmus and here we have kwashiorkor. So lacking in proteins that will make those two problems. This one, marasmus, and here we have kwashiorkor. Okay. Now focus in this chart which shows the protein values of some food. So you have homework here. You have to describe this bar chart and send it to me in B12. Describe it. You know, how do we describe? We learned before how we describe the charts. Okay, I'm gonna send the description during the next 2 days. So try to send the answer during next 48 hours. And please answer the questions, page 52. Page 52, the questions of the lesson. And study well. And if you have any question, you can send it to me in B12. Good luck.